works with Facebook Singapore.
I hope this works.
We will be talking about React Inline Styling with JSS.
Okay. Hello. Is it clear? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, hello everyone. My name is Lin. Lin Han. Han is the surname. Sorry, I'm not used to it. So today I'm going to talk about React Inline Styling, and this is a brief intro of me. I'm a software engineer at Facebook Singapore. I'm based permanently here. So there are software engineers in Facebook Singapore. So I know there is some misconception that this is a business office. It's no longer true. Okay, as all of you know, React Stack was created by Facebook. So at work, we use this suite of tools to help us develop front-end softwares with Flow plus React. Flow is a type checker for JavaScript, similar to TypeScript. And we use Relay to query GraphQL backend and CSS modules to help us manage our CSS and stylings. But at my personal capacity, I use a completely different stack that, with the exception of React, of course, I use TypeScript and Apollo to replace Relay to query GraphQL backends. And I use this tiny little thing called JSS, which is what I'm going to talk about to do inline styling. Why do we talk about this again? Because inline styling, if you are familiar with front-end development, is a long-term battle between die-hard enthusiasts, between CSS people and JavaScript developers who believe they can do everything in JavaScript. I'm doing this again because inline styling has evolved a lot, and in 2019, it's awesome. So this battle, I think, started in 2014 when another Facebook developer, Jado, gave a talk about how Facebook does CSS. And these are the problems he listed with CSS and how we tackle with it. The final conclusion that Jado gave was to use inline styling in React, and I believe it looks like this. I took this from a web page on Facebook, and it is in production. So can anyone tell me what that thing is? It's a button, of course, but what the button does. You probably don't know, because that style, object, or string doesn't reflect anything on the property of the button, but it's a primary button. You can look at the color to determine that. I think it's somewhere RGB 53, 120, and 229. I know there are people who can tell the color from the RGB value, but most people don't. So this is a problem. If you want to check your page or debug your page, it's really hard to navigate when every component looks like this. So there are people, really genius JavaScript developers, who adapt React to something called styled components. It makes use of a ES6 feature to convert template strings to React components. It looks like this, and I'm not a big fan of it. And I know there are more people who hate it than writing CSS. And they don't even like JSX in their JavaScript files, although JSX is basically JavaScript. So here I propose another solution called JSS. It means CSS in JavaScript, but they put the J in front to replace the C. Right, so the syntax is really, really simple. There are 3 steps you basically need to do. The first is, of course, setup. It's a single line of calling the setup function. The preset is optional. It's a suite of plugins that JSS supports to provide convenience. And there are other plugins that help with really amazing stuff, like generating atomic CSS. If you don't know what a word is, Google it. It's really amazing stuff that can reduce the size of your page. And here, the second column shows how you define the CSS rules in JavaScript files. They look really familiar because it's basically JavaScript objects. It's string, number, maybe nested objects. But it resembles something that people have been using for a while, which is the preprocessors. I believe it's called SASE, SASS. So it took some syntax from it and evolved into something that works in JavaScript. And passing that object into the JSS function create style sheet will generate inline CSS in your HTML page. Where is that? Oh. Yeah, here. Sorry. So it looks like CSS because it is. And that's why if some people ask you, hey, I don't want to abandon my CSS knowledge, you can tell them, no, you're not doing that because you're basically writing CSS. It's still generating CSS. And the good part of this is you can extract this when you render on server and put it in some CSS file and still employ all the benefits that the browser can give you, like caching. Yeah. OK, here's a demo. Do I have to look at the screen there? OK. Hope this works. All right, this is the sandbox. I'm going to demo a few scenarios to help you understand why it's so awesome. And these are the scenarios. So first, how do you define CSS? As I mentioned before, you define the CSS fields in JavaScript objects. You can use the string, number, or even refer to other CSS objects because it's basically JavaScript objects because it's basically JavaScript. And how do you set the classes to your React components? JSS, if you use in combination with another library called React JSS, it provides you with some higher order components. You can pass the style into this higher order component, and it will inject a classes object into your React component. And you can make use of the classes, the object field names in your class, in your component class name field. And this thing is pretty cool because it's dynamic. You are using an object within an object field of an injected object. When you're developing it, the class names are made to something that really makes sense. It's basically what you the name you give it, and it automatically minimizes it when you productionize your website, and you don't have to care about that. It's all handled by the library. And there are really cool stuffs that you can do with JSS2. First, you can do nesting. Like here, if you nest some pseudo selectors into your class, you can achieve pseudo selectors. And a lot of people before they have inline. The problem they had with inline styling before is that it's really hard to achieve something like pseudo selectors. So they did a JavaScript way to use event handlers. But nowadays, you no longer have to use all those troublesome event handlers and just use the pseudo selectors, like hover, the same way as you use it in CSS. And also the class name reference. If you want to refer to some other class names, you can totally do that using, let me see if there is any other, oh, sorry, my neck. Oh, sorry, I don't have it. But if you used Sass before, it's basically a $sign. The $sign refers to the other CSS classes. Oh, yeah, it's actually here. Not $sign, the ampersand. How do you do media query? And that's another big problem with inline styling. And you can do media query in the exact same syntax as CSS. And that's why you don't have to abandon your CSS knowledge. Right. But what's the benefit of it on top of CSS if you can do anything CSS does? There's one thing that CSS can never do, which is access the JavaScript properties. So props is a React concept that is really useful. You can refer to special props within the prop that you define to customize how the CSS fields are assigned their values. So you don't have to expose the styles object to make your component totally editable that other developers will exploit. Just give them some special props. Right, and I mentioned about higher order functions. So if you use this in combination with some other libraries like TypeScript, you get type checking. Awesome. And the final big complaint people have with this is how do you do theming? Right? In CSS, you can define, or Sass, you can define your theme in a file with all the magic constants. We can do it similar by using a plain JavaScript object and export it. Whenever you want to use these magical strings or magical numbers, just import this theme object. And I think it's straightforward enough for designers to understand too. OK, so yeah, that's all about React Inline Styling with JSS. Hope you like it. Okay.
I'm really sorry about that neck stretching exercise.
No problem.